Yes. Yes, but it was kind of a gap in between. Yeah. That was really nice.
So, hello everyone. Good morning. Unless you don't know me yet, we have been in the email contact with many of you. I'm Katerina Sem. I'm the organizer of this conference, and it's my great pleasure to have you here in České Budějovice. Thanks for traveling so far away and joining us here today. So once again, all ladies and gentlemen and experts in the tropical ecology, I am really happy to have you here, and I must admit that it's quite a surprise to have you here in Czech Republic, because last time I checked outside, there was not too much of the rainforest, and closer we can get to the tropical environment is in the B building, where we have several tropical trees and a skeleton of elephant. But let's bring a little bit of the tropical environment to Czech Republic, to České Budějovice, and enjoy the meeting here. So we are here today to share the common interest and in the tropical forest, in the exciting environments and in all the diversity which is living and living in tropical forests. And there is so many species which express the challenges for most of us. They express the challenges how to study them, and also the environment itself is very challenging to conduct the research. So with all the seriousness, I believe that we are here today to make a progress in the tropical science and to really have an impact on how the tropical science will be developing, to share the ideas and to get involved in the conservation of the tropical science as such. So let's make most of this rare occasion to meet in Czech Republic and discuss the tropical science. And yeah, welcome everyone and have a great time here. So with this, as I introduce myself, I would like to introduce also the people sitting next to me. We have here Pierre-Michel Forget, the president of the society and the professor at the Nature Museum in France. And we have here also the representatives from here. We have here Jana Irsakova. She is the secretary of the Czech Society for Ecology. And we have here Libor Grubhofer, who is the director of Biology Center. Okay, and I forgot to show their names, so you can see them clearly in case you can't understand them. So welcome, and I would like to give first the microphone to Pierre-Michel and to his improvisation.
Thank you. Thank you. I thought I was the fourth to speak, so I was preparing my talk just now. Because generally I inspire my presentation based on what people said before, so you don't have to repeat. But so I have to be original now, because you gave me the floor first. So we had a dream. I mean, okay, I'm not black, I'm white, but I can use that phrase. We had a dream in the early 90s. That was 33, 35 years ago. And I don't think many of you were born at this time. I was. And it was another world. It was really another world. It was before the fall of the wall, the Berlin Wall. And at this time, my generation, we grew up from the 60s, and there was no future beyond the East. And we were looking west. And with Elisabeth Calco, as a young, early career scientist, just grew up. She grew up here in Eastern Germany. I grew up in Central Europe, in France, which was Central this time. And we were both looking west. As tropical biologists, and because our history, personal history, we wanted to travel, we wanted to see the world, because for us, our hexagon or our German land was a little bit too small for us. So we wanted to go beyond. And unfortunately, on the east, there was a wall. So we could not cross the wall. Instead of that, we crossed the ocean. We went to west, and we went to America. That was the dream of the 60s. America was our dream. And in this time, I joined the ATB, Association for Tropical Biology, because that was our dream, to join people who were doing tropical biology. We were not saying tropical ecology in this time. So that was our dream. And later on, in Oxford, with Elisabeth Calco, we met and we had this dream to create or to have a European Society for Tropical Ecology. It was in the early 90s in Oxford at the forestry department. And we were there with Alan Heré, Eli Calco, and myself, and we were thinking, we have to change the world. We are not politicians, we are biologists, we are ecologists. We have no frontier. I have no frontier. I was born in Northern Africa in a time of colonial era when French were invading Africa. And so we had this dream to make it an international European society. And this time, Gitte was Gesellschaft für Tropical Ecology, and sorry for my very bad accent. And it was a German Society for Tropical Ecology. And with Elisabeth Calco, and with you people in a room, I see Pia, Eckhart. Well, from this time, we are only 2, 3 of us. Wow. We were thinking about having a European society, so not only to have Europeans joining it, but because a lot of people come to Europe for studies, for visiting, it was to have everyone from the world meeting here in Europe, because Europe is a hub. And fortunately, the wall fell in November '89. So now people from east could go west and people from west could go east. And that's where we are now. We are a mixture of this world plan. I mean, this world, this entire planet is somehow represented here. Although I see from your faces that we are still missing a lot of dark hair, dark skin. And I hope that in the future, thanks to you here, we have more dark skin here. I'm sorry, I have a light behind, so I don't see all dark skin, but I see some. I'm white outside and black inside. And so I'm not going to take too much of the floor, but I would say that before late 80s, early 90s, we were West focused, America focused. Most of our reference were from America, from Central America mostly, a bit from Southern America, and a bit from Central Africa, a little bit from Asia too, related to past colonial history. Now it's over, there's no more war. Unfortunately, we still have some viruses that are problems for us to travel sometimes, but now we are clean. Hopefully we are all clean here from COVID. And I would like to finish to say that we are not anymore West focused. We are America focused, Africa focused, Asia focused, South Pacific focused. We are really international. And this is why I'm here as the president of this European Society of Tropical Ecology. But you know, in my country, where I have a passport, we consider that Europe is international. So we are also International Society for Tropical Ecology. And I would like to thank you, our host, and especially Katrina, for really organizing such a wonderful, wonderful event. So I take a long time, but it's okay. Thank you very much. And I'm not here to open it, you will do it.
Okay. Thank you. And now I would like to ask actually Jana Jersakova to give a word for us.
So, ladies and gentlemen, dear scientists and students, I will keep it short, not to delay the start of the conference. And on behalf of the Czech Society for Ecology, it's my great pleasure to welcome you at this conference in the charming town České Budějovice. The Czech Society for Ecology is proud to support and endorse this conference as it aligns with our mission to promote ecological research and conservation efforts in both tropical and temperate regions. As an organization with numerous members actively involved in conducting research in various tropical regions, we are delighted that their expertise and dedication make them invaluable contributors to the field of tropical ecology. We believe that by fostering international collaborations and providing a platform for the exchange of ideas and knowledge, this conference will contribute significantly to the advancement of tropical ecology and the sustainable management of tropical ecosystems. I wish you a pleasant stay here and great success to the conference.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. Mrs. Chair, Mr. President Michel, if I'm not wrong, yeah. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I'm really glad, pleased and delighted to open or co-open your conference on tropical ecology. So Michel went a bit deeper to the history, to 60s, which of course I grew up also in 60s, and I started to gather knowledge about nature, about ecology, of course, as being a boy, pretty much interested in all this stuff. So, but let me tell you that Biology Center, which I am welcoming to České Budějovice you on behalf, being in charge of Biology Center of the Academy of Sciences currently, I must say that we had to move a bunch of institutes, like 6 or 7 institutes of the Czechoslovak Academy of Sciences in that time, talking about mid of 80s of last century. We had to move on just political decision of Communist Party in that time from Prague southward to České Budějovice. And the reason was fully political, just to disseminate university-educated people around the country. And biologists, they were just the first in order. Yeah, and so that's why some of us actually had to move our job in Prague, and we went southward to České Budějovice. Trust me, not very happy, because in that time, simply saying so was really great time. So exactly same as in East Germany. So, and we were really not happy with that. Fortunately, a miracle of November 1989 came, and we became liberated. So we liberated ourselves in that time, and the world for us changed just completely. So the world became open. So, and we started to do really lots of our international activities. Most of us left for to get experience in abroad. So, and being back and started here and keeping ongoing, actually, let's say, research in basically evolutionary biology and ecology. This is actually, these are 2 domains which make portfolio of institutes of biology, biology center of the Academy of Sciences just recently. Yeah? And what I like to tell you, not to take much of time actually, is that the biology center actually officially started in 2007. Before that, individual institutes like entomology, parasitology, plant molecular biology, hydrobiology, soil biology used to be just independent institutes sharing technical and some administration facility together, and also some research facility sharing together, but basically independent. And since 2007, just based on circumstances in that time, so we decided to put our effort together and to start on the roof of biology center. But tropical ecology actually started here thanks to Wojciech Novotný, who cannot be here just in these days, having students in his research base in Papua New Guinea, students from here, and that's why he's missing this wonderful event here held in České Budějovice in these days. But in 1997, I remember like yesterday, so he applied for the Otto Kiene fellowship, so, and he got it. And based on this fellowship, he went to Papua New Guinea, and he started his, let's say, Papua New Guinea era of his life. So, which has taken actually his years till now. That's tropical ecology in České Budějovice, basically in Papua New Guinea, and all his students like Katka and others are just successors of his unbelievable effort and success and keeping actually this sort of extremely demanding research ongoing. Okay, so you came to discuss lots of stuff, recently and currently topic in the field of tropical ecology. And let me wish you success in discussions of such extremely important topics, which probably for next years are actually extremely important for further development of mankind on our planet. Yeah, so a great time while you're here in České Budějovice. Enjoy the daily life here. So weather is apparently going to stay very nice. So taking advantage of that. And please, České Budějovice in these days actually are about getting to the final of international European contest about European Capital of Culture 2028. So please keep your fingers crossed. Next, in the end of next week, we should know winner of this finals. Either small town in East Bohemia, Northeast Bohemia called Broumov, a lovely, cute, very cute town with huge monastery there, or České Budějovice here. So please keep your fingers crossed. Yeah. Okay, so have a good time while you're here and enjoy very much. Yeah. Great success. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for welcoming us and spending time with us. And I think now we can stop for a minute. We will take a photo now, and then I will continue with some housekeeping notes before we move to the plenary talk. So thank you for now. Ja, jenom se vyfotíme. Takhle. Takhle. Yeah, prosím tě, vyfotíš nás? Okay, just here for a second. Thank you. Děkujem. Díky.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, and now when we are all here, I have some practical information for us, because soon after we will be busy with all the program. So as you might know, the society has got a ERI career group, which is the group of young scientists who are supporting themselves on the way to the career as tropical ecologists. And if you are interested in their activities and would like to meet them, you can do it during the lunches. There is a designed table for this group, so feel free to find the label table, join them and chat to them. And they have got also poster at the posters outside. As for the lunches, I would like to ask everyone to go there for 1 p.m. because there are employees eating before that, and you might be served something which you are not interested in. So for the lunches, this is organized by our catering. You need to go for the lunch with your badge, and you have got the little numbers in the pocket. So please take them with you, and you will get the meals which you ordered in advance. So after that, it's close by, like a few hundred meters. So there, it's a few minutes to walk. I also highly encourage you to use the plastic cups which you received in your in your conference bags. So we cut down on the plastic waste. And especially today, we will have the poster session with beers, which is supported financially by the Budweis brewery company. So feel free to use the cups for the beers. And drink a lot, and because there is, I think, enough beer for everyone. And as you might also know from the web pages, we have got a photo competition. You submitted your photos, and some of them are hanging outside just to have there something physically, but you can still, and you are encouraged to vote online. And I put the deadline to Wednesday midnight for your votes. And after that, I will count the numbers. And by the Thursday afternoon, we will announce the winner of this competition with some very nice prizes to receive. We also have a mentor-mentee meeting. When you was registering, you designed some of you indicated that you want to be either mentor or mentee. And this meeting should be happening on Thursday during the morning coffee break. I will get you donuts. And before you are allowed to take the donut from me, you need to sign up at the registration desk and design yourself for the individual mentees. So we have got 17 mentees, around 50 mentees, 17 mentors. There are the names of the mentors. So please, if you are a mentee and you want to join and network with someone specific, put the name there, and one mentor can have up to 3 mentees for the meeting with the donut over the coffee break. So first come, first serve. Please do not try to push too many mentees on one mentor. It would not be doable. As for your things, you might want to drop off some of your clothes or bags where there is no important things. We have got the clock room in the B building. This is really accessible, but if you have the poster bags, clothes, bag without the computer, feel free to drop it there. It's pretty safe, but I would not maybe leave the money there. Next to that room, we have also got so-called relax room. It can be used if you need to make a phone call, meeting, or just hide there from others. We thought that we will have more babies, but we have no babies for breastfeeding, so it's free to be used to whoever needs to have a separate room. And as there is a social media all around us, I encourage you to use the hashtag GTOE 2023 if you are sharing photos on Twitter, and follow us on the Twitter account to share the information about the conference. However, please respect the author's wish not to have their results shared publicly. And if you want to put the no Twitter sign on your presentation, please do so, or just say that you don't want to have your pictures shared publicly. As we have here many nationalities, people from various countries, please be respectful to each other and to your cultural needs. And I would like to also highly encourage you to be time-wise respectful. The talks are 15 minutes long, and there will be the chairs indicating the time, 5 minutes to the end of this 15-minute block, 3 minutes to the end, which means that this is when you was supposed to be finishing and giving the 3 minutes to the questions, and then maybe 1 minute to the end, and then when we show the sign finish, that's for you time to leave and to keep all the discussions and questions for the foyer. Okay, so this is all from me, unless you have some question to me regarding, or you can ask me outside if something is not clear to you. And exactly 1 minute to 9:15, I would like to bring to the stage our first plenary speaker. And I don't know where, okay, welcome. This is your glass. Okay. Excellent. Okay, so it's my great pleasure to welcome here Rodrigo Camara Leret, who came from Switzerland. Yes, Switzerland, from Zurich. I just scared. And Rodrigo's research is centered on the conservation biology and mainly on the cultural heritage. He is really the person responsible for the concept of indigenous knowledge networks. And he brings the human dimensions to the studies of ecosystem services. And his work is mostly focused in South America and New Guinea. And he is focusing a lot on the capacity building in these countries and organizing the workshop across the tropical countries. And he is focusing also on the networking of the scientists across various countries and institutions to build the expert verified checklists of the world's richest island floras. And yeah, so this is for your introduction. Thank you very much for being here with us, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, it's okay. Thanks, Katerina. Yeah, it's a great honor to be here. Thanks so much for the kind invitation. It was in the 2015 Tropical Ecology meeting that I met one of my mentors, and I would end up working with him, Jordi Bascomte. So he was giving the keynote at that meeting in Zurich. So I'm overwhelmed with this invitation. And also, I'm very pleased to be here because, as it was said, Czech Republic is a hotspot for tropical ecology research. And at that meeting in Zurich in 2015, I also met Wojtek Nowotny. And through him, I also had the chance to meet Katerina and know about her work about what makes, why are forests green? These ambitious questions that are very inspiring. So today I want to tell you 3 stories about this idea of bringing together culture and biology. And to me, this picture of the burning of the Library of Alexandria is a symbol of the tragic consequences of the loss of human culture. Just as knowledge was written down in these papyrus scrolls, we can quantify the magnitude of this tragedy, like by counting the number of scrolls or papyrus, say 40,000 to 400,000 scrolls burnt during this tragedy. But by contrast, in non-literate societies, such as in indigenous communities, the loss of knowledge happens in silence, and we cannot quantify it. And yet, this loss has important repercussions for the livelihoods of indigenous and local communities, despite it is often neglected in studies of ecosystem services. And we know by the prominent example of the cinchona bark that indigenous knowledge, local knowledge, has had very important benefits to local communities, but also to global economies. So far, however, most studies on ecosystem services have been affected by 2 sets of limitations. On the one hand, these studies are usually focusing on aggregate descriptors such as the number of useful species or the number of uses, but they leave out the identity of species, of uses, and of their relationships. And on the other hand, most studies, although the trend is fortunately changing, have focused on documenting information with few informants or few ethnic groups. And despite of this, they extrapolate and generalize to broad regions. So in this first story I want to tell, we attempted to address these gaps by examining how indigenous knowledge is structured locally and regionally, how it is affected by the turnover of biological and cultural heritage, and how the progressive loss of biological or cultural heritage may undermine the resilience of these communities. To do so, we focused on this region, Northwest South America, which has about 110 different indigenous groups, but it is also home to the Amazon wilderness area, the Andes and Choco biodiversity hotspots. And what we did is we spent 18 months in the field gathering interviews in 57 communities to try to understand how local people utilize their surrounding wild palm resources. And we focus on palms because, as you know, being tropical ecologists, they are everywhere important in the tropics for food, for construction, or for medicine, ritual purposes, or for local economies. And palms are also a very important model group because they are widely distributed in the tropics. In our study area, they have a high species richness, which you can see peaks in the west, in the confluence of Colombia, Peru, and Ecuador, and Brazil. And also palms are easy to recognize, even for a student such as me who had never done fieldwork with palms before. In fact, many indigenous cultures have names to denote in their folk taxonomies palms. For example, the Macuna will use the suffix ño, and therefore they have names of palm species that are Jotaño, Miricaño, and so forth. And these are not an exception. There are other groups such as the Achuar, whose name comes from the Moriche or Mauritia flexuosa palm. They are the people of the Moriche palm. And palms are also relatively well studied from a taxonomic standpoint. We have field guides to the palms of the Americas, to Colombia, Ecuador, Bolivia. So this facilitates their collection and identification in the field, but also their determination in the herbarium. So we began the study by introducing this concept of indigenous knowledge networks, which you can see here relate particular plant species in the right with services in the left, and these are connected through the local knowledge held in a community, here shown as links. So in some ways, these indigenous knowledge networks are the equivalent of the papyrus scrolls of literate societies. And then you can imagine that in two given communities, we have three types of scenarios of knowledge turnover. On the one hand, we have the situation here where there's a species present in community A, but it is absent in community B. And therefore, the knowledge between these communities differs and is shown by red arrows. By contrast, you can have the situation where the same species are present in both communities, such as the top example there. And here we find that even when the species is shared between both communities, they also have the same knowledge, shown as here as black arrows. But if there's turnover in cultural heritage, we will find that even when the same species is found, there's different knowledge, shown here as blue arrows. So we attempted to decompose the dissimilarity between every pair of indigenous communities into the components of biological or plant species and service nodes, heritage, or cultural heritage or link turnover. And what we found is that actually the contribution is relatively similar. In other words, the realization of ecosystem services in the study area is as equally constrained by the turnover in the biological than in the cultural dimensions. Next, we wanted to understand to what degree communities are equivalent in their local knowledge, or rather, if there are some communities that have much more knowledge. And to do this, we built what we refer to as this indigenous knowledge meta-web, which is the global total of all the knowledge contained about plant species and services in the study area. So here you can see as rows, we have plant species, and as columns, plant services. And the color of the squares shows the number of communities that cite a given plant service link. So in total, there were 120 plant species, 250 services, and about 1,700 links. And with this information, then we could classify communities based on their distance from the meta web. So communities that are very close to the global pool will have a high degree of knowledge, whereas others that are far from the meta web have much lower knowledge. And to this, we added information on community population size to provide this classification that is analogous to the concept of keystone species in ecological communities. So, for example, we found strong differences in communities in the study area with 8 communities shown here in orange that are considered keystone communities because they have disproportionate amount of knowledge despite their small population size. And finally, we wanted to explore what are the impacts of the loss of plant species and knowledge on the meta web. But this cannot be done by looking at individual communities in isolation. So to explore this, we simulated the progressive loss of plants following the rationale that the plant species with small geographic ranges will be the first to go extinct. And we also simulated the loss of knowledge based on the rationale that the least cited links will be the first to disappear in communities. And then we explored how this progressive loss of plants or knowledge affects network robustness, measured here as the size of the largest component, which is a measure typically used by physicists to study network resilience. And you can see that the extinction of plants affects network robustness in a similar fashion as the extinction of knowledge, shown here as orange or yellow dots. But it is the simultaneous loss of plants and knowledge that leads to a much faster collapse of these networks. So overall, this study points out to the irreplaceability of cultural heritage, which is something that is often not a focus of studies, which tend to center more on the extinction of plant species and focus just on the end of the spectrum of the picture, disregarding the fate of communities that are living in these biodiverse regions. And yet, we know that languages and cultures are facing much stronger threats in some parts of the world than biodiversity. There are 7,400 languages spoken in the world. And according to linguists, at least 1/3 of these will no longer be spoken by the end of the century. So because language is the vehicle through which information is transmitted in all societies, and in this case, also medicinal knowledge, we wanted to explore what would happen in this regional pharmacy that shows jars with remedies as plants known by languages, shown here as jar labels, and to assess to what degree the loss of indigenous languages would lead to the loss of unique medicinal knowledge, and how this risk of language extinction would compare to the risk of plant extinction. And to explore this idea, we assembled 3 databases from 3 regions with high biocultural diversity: North America, Northwest Amazonia, and New Guinea. For North America, we collated information from the Native American Ethnobotany database, which is the largest repository of ethnobotanical knowledge for the region. that contains information on plant species, medicinal services, and languages that cite species and services. And for New Guinea, we assembled a new database consisting of about 500 references of information published since 1885, and also information from about 800 herbarium specimens containing information on human-plant interactions in New Guinea. And for Amazonia, we relied on the book by Richard Schultes, The Healing Forest, which brings together 50 years of knowledge of his work in the region, where he spent 14 uninterrupted years working with indigenous communities, mostly in Colombia, Peru, and Ecuador. So overall, our database contained 3,597 species, about 12,500 medicinal services, all cited by 236 indigenous languages. And here you can see in the y-axis the number of languages, and in the x-axis the medicinal services. So what we are showing here in orange is the proportion of all medicinal services that are only cited by one language. In other words, in North America, 73% of all the medicinal services are linguistically unique. That is, they are not known by more than one language. 91% in South America, in Northwest Amazonia, and 84% in New Guinea. So we then wanted to explore to what degree this unique knowledge is clustered across the language tree, or whether it is dispersed. If it's clustered, then the rationale would be that we can prioritize conservation efforts in some cultures that have much more unique knowledge than others. So what we did is we built language phylogenies for the three study areas, and mapped the number of linguistically unique medicinal services and calculated their degree of phylogenetic clustering. And overall, we found that phylogenetic clustering was negligible. So in other words, unique medicinal knowledge is widely scattered in all three study areas, meaning that all cultures matter. There's no silver bullet that you can just focus on specific parts of the clade to do biocultural conservation efforts. And finally, we wanted to explore to what degree unique knowledge in the three regions is associated to threatened languages or threatened plants. And to do this, we assembled information on the status of the threatened status of languages from the Glottolog, which derives a metric from the UNESCO Atlas of Endangered Languages and the Ethnologue. And we found that in North America and Northwest Amazonia, 86% and 100% of all unique medicinal knowledge was associated to languages that are threatened, which to us indicates that the Americas are a hotspot for biocultural heritage that requires further documentation efforts. And by contrast, in New Guinea, 31% of unique medicinal knowledge was associated to threatened languages. And this pattern is likely robust, but we also came across a recent study that showed, looking at about 6,000 students and their proficiency in language, that only 58% of these 6,000 students spoke their indigenous language, whereas 91% of their parents were fluent in these languages. And these students that did not speak their mother tongue, they replaced the knowledge of wild medicinal plants with knowledge about species that are non-native. So we think that this is an indicator that the online linguistic databases of the threat status of languages, at least for New Guinea, somewhat overestimate the situation. By contrast, when we look at plants, we find that for those plants that have IUCN assessments, a very small proportion of these are threatened. So only 4% or less than 5% in the 3 study regions of unique medicinal knowledge is associated to threatened plants. In other words, we can summarize the study by this beautiful quote by William Ballet that says that the Rosetta Stone for traditional ecological knowledge in Amazonia is not made of rock. Rather, it is to be found in living native languages and cultural practices. And yet, these languages are eroding so fast that it is as if these letters from the rock are fading away, so that at some point we won't be really able to read these landscapes. And this idea of integrating indigenous and scientific knowledge is not new. Already Humboldt, in his diaries 200 years ago, referred his impressions about the sophisticated knowledge of the people he met during his travels. And he was so fortunate that one of the first native people he met was a really knowledgeable person about natural history, so that he even refers to his name as Carlos del Pino, and he did not hesitate to invite him to accompany him over 16 months. So there's more and more efforts to try to integrate indigenous knowledge with its local place-based understanding, usually more restricted to local scales, with what is more formally done in academic, let's just put it that way, ecology, more formal university spaces that has a greater, you could say, flexibility in scales, more draws on bigger data. And this is actually what many scientific assessments such as IPBES have tried to accomplish, to assess the trends of nature. Many of these assessments draw on indigenous and local knowledge, but they focus mostly on capturing this information from the literature, because it's very hard to capture it de novo, although there's efforts to bring people together in roundtable discussions and online groups. But a lot of the information that is drawn in these international assessments relies on the published literature. So to explore if there's any information gaps and biases in this literature and how it might affect policy and science assessments, we wanted to explore the situation in New Guinea, which is an open lab for culture with more than 1,000 different indigenous languages, or 1/7 of the world's languages in only 0.5% of the terrestrial surface area, and a flora of at least 13,000 species, but estimated to be probably around 30,000. And we wanted to explore to what degree the information on plant services is unevenly distributed across cultures in the region, but also how the fundamental ecology of plant services might influence the achievement of comprehensive assessments. So I mentioned already this review of the ethnobotanical information that we did. So analyzing this information, we found that overall, there's only information on about 217 different indigenous groups in New Guinea since 1885, which represents only 20% of the region's cultural diversity. Furthermore, as you can see in this map with green polygons showing languages that are not endangered, 75% of all the information is coming from languages that are not endangered. And finally, as you can see in this graph here, 90% of all indigenous groups in New Guinea have under 100 use reports in the literature, meaning that their worldviews, their knowledge, and their potential contributions to understand the trends in biodiversity conservation are relatively unknown to policymakers. And I'm showing here the 3 groups with the highest amounts of information in the literature: the Dani, the Yali, and the Mianmin, most of them living in the New Guinea highlands in Indonesian side. So it is remarkable that of New Guinea's indigenous groups, some of which are very well known to anthropologists, such as the Asmat, very well known for carving these shields, and also subject of a lot of controversy due to the disappearance of Rockefeller's son, who at the time in the 60s, I believe, was trying to build an art museum in New York to showcase indigenous art in the same footing than Western art. So not as artifacts or as artesania, but as actual art. He disappeared in this region, and it was unknown whether he drowned or he was actually subject of cannibalism. It turns out it was the latter, and there's a beautiful book by a journalist that explored this situation. But in any case, it's remarkable that the Asmat, who number more than 70,000 people and occupy this area in red that is half the size of Switzerland, are yet to figure in the ethnobotanical literature. So finally, we wanted to explore the rarity in plant services, and we were really inspired by the framework of Deborah Rabinowitz, who tragically passed away at the age of 39, but she left a huge legacy to tropical ecology through her work of 7 forms of rarity, which essentially is a framework to integrate information on geographic range size, local abundance, and habitat specialization of species to categorize species into 7 forms of rarity. So we were inspired by this framework, but we applied it to plant services here with the rationale that plant services with large geographic ranges are those cited by more than one culture. Plant services that are locally common will be cited in more than one reference, and plant services that relate to habitat specialists are those that are found in only one habitat versus more than one habitat. And overall, we found that 64% of about 4,500 plant services analyzed in New Guinea correspond to the most extreme case of rarity. In other words, when we are talking about incorporating indigenous knowledge into science policy assessments, we face the limitation of biases in the cultures that are incorporated into the literature, their degree of endangerment, since most information comes from cultures whose languages are well known. And finally, the fact that most services are rare, so that we lose information on a large degree of this knowledge. But on the other side of the spectrum, we have species that are charismatic, that are, you could say, culturally important species or umbrella species for ecologists that facilitate biocultural approaches and upscaling conservation frameworks from local to global scales. You can think of, for example, coca as a species that is culturally important in South America, kava in the Asia Pacific, betel nut, or even in my home country, grape, which produces wine. So we wanted to explore this idea of culturally important species and how they can help us articulate global biocultural conservation frameworks Culturally important species can be defined as those that have a recognized role in supporting cultural identity, as they are generally the basis for religious, spiritual, and social cohesion, and provide a common sense of place, purpose, belonging, or rootedness associated with the living world. So here we conducted a review acknowledging already that the literature is biased, and that even if we search for the terms culturally important species, we will lose a lot of information because lots of references don't use this term to explain this phenomenon. But acknowledging this caveat, we found about 385 species. As you can see, most of them corresponding to plants that are considered culturally important species. And in some of these cases, these species could be even defined cultural keystone species, because the loss of these species will have a really strong repercussion on the cultural survival of particular groups. And we coined or devised this metric of biocultural status to integrate the degree of biological threat of these species, which you can see here in the y-axis, and the degree of cultural threat here in the x-axis. And basically, we found that in comparison to plant species, which are much better known and are less threatened, the situation for cultural groups is really extreme, so that the biocultural status of these cultural important species is driven by the endangerment of local cultures. But to me, an even more striking figure from this study was that if we look at the full set of IUCN species, we see that 12% of them have been assessed. By contrast, culturally important species have only, 12% of the IUCN are data deficient, meaning they have not been yet assessed. By contrast, when we look at culturally important species, 41% of these are data deficient. And to me, this shows that there's a strong disconnect between two things. On the one hand, between biologists and anthropologists, because the species that may matter to biologists might be different than the ones that anthropologists are finding out that really matter for local communities. And on the other hand, the disconnect between policymakers and local needs. And for those botanists out there, you probably realize this vine, it's actually one of the most cited vines in South America, Banisteriopsis caapi, or ayahuasca or yahe, very well known to dozens of indigenous communities in the region and non-indigenous people as well. It even has a religion in Brazil, União do Vegetal. You can see them here drinking. And it's probably easier to say who does not drink ayahuasca in Brazil than to say who does drink. But there should be at least, based on this article here, at least 20 to 30,000 ayahuasca drinkers, just considering the União do Vegetal. And this is only one restricted sphere of society. So we can probably imagine that there are hundreds of thousands of events of drinking ayahuasca during the year in South America, and this has expanded worldwide. But yet, this species has yet to be assessed by the IUCN. So, of course, a lot of the ayahuasca is obtained by cultivating it, but there's also a non-negligible amount of wild harvesting. And then this leads me to wrap up this talk with two projects that I'm really excited that we will be exploring over the next 5 years. And the first one has to do with introducing a new chemical dimension to my research, acknowledging the fact that so far most of the information we have been looking at is based on interviews about the reports of plants. But there's you could say, an invisible layer that is the chemistry of plants. And tropical plants are relatively neglected. In chemistry, we know that only 6% of higher plants have been screened for biological activity. So we want to deepen this a bit more, and thanks to the Swiss National Science Foundation starting grant, we want to explore introducing this chemical dimension to ethnobiology through a large-scale metabolomics workflow to try to characterize the phytochemical space that Amazonian societies explore or maybe miss. And we know that Amazonia is going to be subject of intense effects of climate change and land use change over the years to come. This study in 2019 showed that about 65% of plant species will see reductions in their geographic range. But so far, most studies on the impacts of global change in the Amazon have focused on the currency of species, how species ranges will decrease or how species might go extinct. But we know that there's an entire different dimension that has to do with the chemistry of the Amazonian flora. And we know that there's about 200,000 metabolites in the plant kingdom. But how many of these might be vanishing due to the deforestation and climate change impacts in the Amazon is something that we really do not understand very well. On the other hand, our understanding of what motivates local people to select plants to incorporate them to their pharmacopoeias is driven by temperate visions of the influence of organoleptic factors, such as here, this widely cited aroma wheel of wine, where you can see all the temperate ingredients shown in red and only 4 tropical ingredients shown in green. So working with indigenous communities in the Amazon using these frameworks is quite useless. So we would like to develop these aroma wheels based on local perceptions and the local flora. And this research will consist of 3 work packages. The first one will aim to bring together existing information on the useful plants of the Amazon that will underpin all subsequent research. Then we want to look at the healing forest chemistry, all the plant species that Richard Evans Schultes deposited in the herbarium in Colombia, where our collaborator works, and do a large-scale untargeted metabolomic workflow to test different hypotheses about the use of plants and their chemistry. And finally, we want to work, or we are working with the Matapi people in white sand forests, which are a very interesting model ecosystem that already Janssen in the 70s pointed out to the importance of defense compounds in white sand forest species. And this is something that the Matapi people also acknowledge as they identify white sand forest species as the most potent. And they also have different perceptions about the potency of these plants along the ecological calendar year. So this led us to develop this work package jointly with them so that they perform research throughout the year to understand the variation in chemistry in these white sand forests and its relationship to their useful plants. And we want to really acknowledge that we are not going to work with indigenous collaborators as assistants in the field. They have salaries, although this might bring a lot of headaches to the administrators in the university. But we are already providing salaries for researchers to sit down and write their knowledge, as is the case of Rodrigo Matapi. He's one of the last shamans of the Matapi people who count less than 100 individuals in the Miriti Paraná River area in Colombia. And he's been transcribing his knowledge for now 20 years. And we are working at the moment on different aspects, such as the temporal dimension of their ecological calendar and how this informs all decisions related to conservation. And finally, I want to end by this. Well, the figure turned upside down, but you can imagine a mountain going up. So the land is what really allows knowledge to be transmitted and really is the fundamental pillar for conservation. And a few years ago, we were called by this NGO, Tayrona Heritage Trust, to accompany the Kogi people of the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta in Colombia, which you see here. It is the highest coastal mountain chain in the world, with peaks of about 5,900 meters and glaciers. And it is the ancestral land of the Kogi people, the Wiwa, Arhuaco, and Cancuamo. But since the Spanish invasion and then the invasion of Colombian settlers, they retreated to the highlands. And they are probably one of the last living cultures that represent these large civilizations, such as the Incas. But this is not from Peru. This picture is showing one of the mounds that are found here in the mountain that are connected by hundreds of stone-tiled roads that they built, and where thousands of Kogi used to live. So the Kogi retreated during this period up to the highlands, but over the last decades, they've been working with NGOs to reclaim the lands that are found lower slope and almost down to the base of the mountain. As you can see here in this figure, this black line is actually their delimitation of their sacred sites that are keeping the intactness of the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta. And what they are doing, unfortunately, the picture is very upside down, but what they are doing is, as a series of actions of restoring specific points that were lost, they're kind of weaving again their lands as a sort of acupuncture of the landscape. So in this case, we want to better understand how the Kogi are doing this. And actually it was the Kogi that said that rather than asking scientists to come and provide advice of how to do restoration, they want to show the world how they are doing restoration in an efficient manner as a way of hopefully upscaling these efforts to other areas of the world. And we have started with a generous donation from a philanthropist to purchase about 30 hectares of land that you can see here in the right. And now, hopefully in the autumn, we will start the process to visit the land, to understand how the Kogi are doing different actions to start reviving this landscape, with the ultimate hope of bringing back water to the Sierra Nevada Santa Marta, which has been suffering a lot from droughts in the last decade, and which they attribute is due to the deforestation that is ongoing in the lands that are no longer belonging to them. So I want to thank the indigenous communities with whom I've had the fortune of working, my mentor, Jordi Bascomte, with who I worked for the last 3 years, and colleagues of the NC's working group, whose research I presented, also my students and funders. And thank you very much again, Katerina, for this invitation, and all of you for your assistance here.
Okay, thank you for your very interesting talk, and we have plenty of time for questions. So if anyone is interested to ask, I will be running in among you. And
thank you very much for this great talk. As we know from history, in the industrialized countries of the Northern Hemisphere, economic development, industrialization, apparently unavoidably results in the loss of traditional knowledge. Then on the other hand, countries in the tropics, they will develop and the way of life will change. And do you have any ideas what could be done to allow economic development on one hand, but at the same time avoiding the loss of traditional knowledge as it happened in Northern Hemisphere countries?
That's, I guess, the million-dollar question. Very hard to answer. I mean, look, for example, the advent of cell phones. This has been a very positive development. Before, we could not really communicate with our colleagues. Now, this morning, I was just texting, and there are definitely things that are very beneficial from development. The problem is when that development is imposed, and I guess the basic premise is land rights and the possibility just from the start to be able to decide whether your land is respected or not. This is already a big challenge with indigenous peoples worldwide. We saw with Bolsonaro in Brazil over the last years. And then there are many other factors that are coming, like roads, like media, like Western education, even the Kogi example where they want to reclaim the lands. There's this tension of being isolated up in the mountains to coming down and being exposed to the dominant worldview, but still willing to do this because otherwise they will lose what was once theirs. So it's very tricky, and I don't have a specific recipe for this. I think it might depend more on an individual cultural basis, and then maybe in each region there are different nuances that lead communities to organize one way or another. For example, in Papua New Guinea, communities have free will to develop or not. This is not the case in other parts where the subsoil resources belong to the state. So yeah, maybe we could chat over a beer much longer about this. Thank you.
Hi, very interesting talk. And my question is kind of related to Eckart's question. So what do you think is the reason of the loss of the language knowledge? Like, do you think that children don't want to learn it anymore, or that parents would prefer their children to learn English or Spanish, like to be able to work or study abroad?
Yeah, so, well, I'll just start by saying that we live in until very recently, most communities are multilingual. So this phenomenon of speaking one language is actually quite rare. And now, for example, the communities I work with, it was often the pressure by missionaries to not speak their own language that forced, either through violence or through like reducing their self-esteem, to not practice or speak their language in schools. And in turn, that led parents to not teach their children. But that happened maybe several decades ago. And of course, this legacy persists in some of communities, but there are also efforts now to revitalize these languages, such as, for example, the NASA people in Colombia. They were doing a socio-cultural census in one village, and they found that only 200 of 800 people were speaking the language, and most were over 30 years old. So the language would disappear in that community if it's not taught to children. So they are revitalizing this in schools. And I think one way is also to look at ethno-education as a way to strengthen these languages. But it's very different to conservation of biological resources, where you can put a fence and conserve, whereas you cannot really put a fence to a mind. And so, yeah, I think it's much trickier. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this inspiring talk and very relevant talk also. I've one and a half questions. So one is, so how complete or incomplete is our knowledge about the indigenous knowledge per tribe or per group? So you have referred to some numbers, like not all of them are covered, but I could imagine that you have to ask very sensitively or maybe study very intensively with them, like in the example where you even pay sort of researchers in the communities to really fully get the information. And sometimes they may not be willing to reveal it. So is this a problem, or do you sort of, like referring to your first slides, is it rather complete? And then related, to what extent can they, would be one solution to exchange all this traditional knowledge among the indigenous communities, to allow them sort of to share this information among them, to also rescue this knowledge? So would this be one solution maybe in the modern world, to share?
Yeah, I think, so I presented the case of services in New Guinea, but there's another example of palms that I was doing in my PhD, and there we found that despite palms are one of the best studied plant families in ethnobotany, we found that this ethnobotanical knowledge was vastly underdocumented, because we compared information from the literature published like during 50 years with intensive effort that we did in the field with a standard protocol and doing interviews with experts and general informants. And we found that when we were comparing the ethnic groups in the literature and those we visited, we could make lots of additions to what was known in the literature. And this was across countries and across cultures, across indigenous and non-indigenous cultures. So I think and also the fact that rarity exists in the tropics to such a degree, then I think this also exacerbates the idea that it's very hard to capture all the knowledge. But when there are these culturally important species, then they can help like facilitate these communication exchanges, like you say. So for example, in the Putumayo, in the Andes Amazon connection in Colombia, there's the Umillac. It's called the, I'll translate it to English, Union of Indigenous Doctors that heal with ayahuasca. And it's like a organization of shamans that periodically have exchanges and share knowledge, which is something maybe new also historically, since, I mean, many of these groups until very recently were not having, I mean, there were exchanges of goods, certainly even from the Andes to the Amazon, but the degree of maybe these like exchanges that we see now, I think were kind of rare. More so in areas like New Guinea, where until recently also like you could not cross from one hill to the other. So yeah, I think that's a promising maybe development of the connections we see and the reduction of warfare in some places, but it is underpinned maybe by this rarity. So it's a bit difficult to document fully.
Thank you. Very, very interesting talk. I was very surprised by this comparison of the IUCN species and the culturally important species. And I'm wondering what would the protection of this species, or like improved protection of this species, look like without falling into neo-colonialistic practices, no? And like how to handle, for example, communities that in contrast to the Kogi, for example, which are very open and have also been very interested in getting university titles and that kind of stuff. But how does that contrast with communities that don't want to be contacted? How to introduce the conservation of culturally important species there?
Very good question. So the Kogi, I must say, are very reclusive. Until very recently, they were using very smartly the resources from the Colombian government in a very different way than many other communities, because they didn't use them for a long time. They reflected to their organization and their mamas, which are like the leaders in the community, how to use something that you haven't been relying on, such as money. So they thought that what we have to do is buy land and educate. And so, but it was only recently that there was a call from them to do documentaries in their lands. And only now also they've been more open to this idea of working with NGOs, but in a very intelligent way. They know what they want. They're very organized, and they know that when this is over, yeah, you're not welcome here. This is, this is what we need. So I think this is one model that is promising, that is based on their self-reflection, on their knowledge of their needs, and also on putting some boundaries. I don't know about groups living in voluntary isolation. That is more tricky. I mean, I think in those cases, because of the simple fact of living in voluntary isolation, you're not going to do any research there, right? So you should not be doing research with those groups. So I guess in those situations, which represent a small fraction of the world's groups, but still have an important conservation impact. For example, the Chiribiquete National Park in Colombia was recently expanded, and now it has the size of Switzerland. And one of the reasons for expanding it was the likely presence of groups living in voluntary isolation. But there's also restrictions to who can enter to do research. So I think in that case, maybe there's no real dilemma. It's just, you just don't do research there.
Thank you very much. Very nice talk. My question is one, but with like 4 branches.
Okay.
Okay. You've talked about impact. And for us as scientists, we know that the impact is with the donor who gives the money for the research. The impact is with us scientists, publishing, and of course, attending international conferences. But I've seen also in your work, there is impact where you collected your information. So my question is, how do you navigate to be able to put into action the results of your research with the community, given that donors will not give you money to action your findings? Secondly, you said you are paying indigenous researchers. Again, how did you navigate this so that you also mentioned that it's a headache to the administrators? So how do you make the headache headacheless for the administrators? And then you are also saying that you want to collaborate. There's this question of inequality of collaboration, even among scientists in the different regions. But now you want to take this question of collaboration even further to collaborate with indigenous researchers. Scientists and scientists, PhD and PhD professors and professors from different regions, there are issues of inequality in collaboration. So how do you again navigate this question of involving people who don't have PhDs, the indigenous scientists? Thank you.
Thank you for the 3 questions. So yeah, it's a very good point, and I think it's the fact that we see. It's kind of sad when we see that Humboldt was already acknowledging the importance of local knowledge 200 years ago, and now we see that it's kind of limited by bureaucrats and administrators. But I was very inspired by the work done here by Wojtek Nowotny, who has been working for more than 20 years supporting local researchers, parabiologists, para-ecologists. But regarding your first question, the impact, local impact, I think there are several ways. One is a basic devolution of information. Of course, the donors often don't fund that. So I had to use my own pocket money after my PhD, and I went to there. But I have to say that was really very important, because since then, it was like a new relationship blossomed. So there's more trust now. It's more like, yeah, we care about each other, and I think we have to find ways nowadays, even through just sending a PDF. If you can't go physically, at least anyone can do that nowadays. But that leads me to another way of doing local impact, which is by working together. So after you build these ties, I think it's a long-term commitment, which is hard sometimes for donors to acknowledge. And when you want to hire researchers who you had the fortune to meet 10 years ago and now formally, it's a disconnection between what maybe the donors approve, because some of these funding bodies, they like the idea and they support it, but then when you have to implement it in the university, then it's a bit difficult. So I'm causing headaches at the moment, and I hope to continue causing them, because it's the only way. I mean, that should not be a limitation. If we are all on the same page and we all acknowledge that this is important, then it should be the system that tries to shift. So yeah, and I'm quite perseverant. So I think we will find a way, although yeah, it is being now challenging for them. And then yeah, the last one about collaboration, of course, it also involves not only working with indigenous people who might not have a formal education, but even with collaborators who may have university degrees but want to do a PhD. And I think our responsibility is also to diversify academia. So if we work on tropical ecology, we have to also support students from tropical countries. And that's like a fundamental aspect of many research groups. Is one that I'm also following. And so the idea is that we, of course, work with indigenous researchers formally. They work remotely. We also work with students to do their PhD. So we open an opportunity in the University of Zurich to come from Philippines, from Colombia, from New Guinea. Not yet any students from Africa, but who knows? And then also we work with research groups in those countries. So, I mean, now we're working in Colombia a lot. So I work with professors in the local university, and we have a memorandum of understanding. So this is crucial. So we have a clear goals, shared goals. In this case, when I was writing one of the proposals, the local university professor was involved from the start in conceptualizing the ideas. Also in the interviewing of the students that we would hire, and then in the fieldwork and research, they will be involved. So yeah, those are very good questions, and I think it's our responsibility as scientists to stand up to those challenges. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Rodrigo, for giving the wonderful talk. Thank you for questions. I have seen you had. Ale už to teď říkat nebudem.